Canadians telling Canadian stories, making a place in a media marketplace crowded out by bigger, better financed cultural voices from outside this country. That aspiration prompted what's now somewhat affectionately called CanCon rules. In effect, since 1971, they've always been the subject of great debate. Does that conversation change in the era of Netflix, Apple, Facebook, and all those other global mega players? Let's find out with Alan Cross. He's the host of the syndicated radio program, The Ongoing History of New Music. It's on Toronto FM station 102.1 The Edge. Daniel Schwanen, Vice President of Research at the C.D. Howe Institute, and Susan Krasinski-Robertson, Media and Marketing Reporter at the Globe and Mail. And it's a delight, Susan, to welcome you here for the first time. You two gentlemen, welcome back to our program. Normally, we don't start a program by saying what we don't have. We usually start by saying what we do have. But Michael McMillan, the Academy Award-winning producer from Blue Ant Media, was supposed to be joining us today. I don't want to alarm anybody, but he got into a car accident. He is okay, but that's why he's not here today, and we just put that out there to wish him well. All right, let's start with this. CanCon, what is it?
It's not that complicated. It's what is produced by Canadians or in Canada sometimes, depending on whether you look at a tax credit or an exhibition quota, or a product, a movie, for example, that tells a Canadian story. So all these would qualify, depending on what kind of policy you're looking at. Again, it could be a tax credit, an exhibition quota.
But the idea is to come up with something to give Canadian producers and artists a shot at their airwaves.
That's right. So yeah, exactly. So producers, artists, people that work in the cultural industries in general, the airwaves, the bookshelves potentially, the cinemas, yes, absolutely.
Susan, why was it brought in the first place?
Well, the idea behind it was based on the fact that we live next to a cultural behemoth. That's the United States. And so the idea was that we needed some kind of subsidies and some kind of extra support in order to make Canadian culture thrive, that we weren't big enough, essentially, to overcome all of this culture coming at us from the South.
And what was the hoped-for outcome of it all, Alan?
Well, we had both a cultural and industrial policy. Cultural in the sense that we would allow Canadian musicians, in my particular area, an opportunity to be heard on the radio next to international musicians, and an industrial strategy in the sense that we had no recording studios, we had no record labels, we had no agents, we had no promoters, we had none of those things that require the building of a first world music industry.
And it was considered imperative to have because
America and Britain were swamping us with music, and all our best talent was leaving the country for greener pastures.
Legacy broadcasters, and I guess we're one of them, and you're one of them, traditional newspapers, they have to, well, I guess newspapers not, but certainly radio and television had strict Canadian content rules that they had to adhere to. Did it make a difference?
It did, because for many years, this whole system was based on scarcity, and that's really what has changed now. So back in the day, a television license was essentially a license to print money. Putting that control of those licenses into the hands of the CRTC allowed the CRTC to use a license as a carrot, essentially, to force the broadcasters to invest in and to show Canadian content. And that was the system that we had for many years. And it worked in terms of getting Canadian content made. People are divided in terms of whether it worked in creating content that people actually wanted to consume. That's a different question.
We'll hold off on that part of the argument for now.
But the scarcity model that the industry was based on is now going away. So you have these other players coming into the market who don't require licenses in order to broadcast. I'm talking about Netflix, I'm talking about Amazon, and all the others that are lining up waiting to launch very, very soon. So the idea of a TV license is a somewhat anachronistic idea now, where you have the ability to reach consumers, to reach viewers, without being under the strictures of the rules that the CRTC imposed.
Same thing with radio. Radio was all about using public property, which are the frequencies that the stations broadcast on. If you were going to use that to make some money, then you needed to put something back into the system, which was, well, we have CanCon rules, SOCAN fees, neighboring rights fees, contributions to organizations like Star Maker and Factor. So it was, okay, again, the carrot and stick sort of thing. We'll give you a frequency for a specified period of time, but you've got to put back.
But in the gist of it, like in an hour of radio, in a typical hour of radio, you would have to play so many X number of minutes of Canadian artists?
Right. It began at 30%, and then it's up to 35% as a minimum. Some stations have promised 40% and above just as a way to get a license.
Now, Daniel, these days, of course, are gone. We don't have a finite number of radio and television stations now. We have an almost infinite number now, thanks to video streaming and satellite radio and all of that kind of stuff. Do CanCon rules now, in your view, put the legacy media, the old-fashioned TV stations and radio stations, at some kind of competitive disadvantage because these new kids on the block don't have to follow any of these rules?
You still need a definition of Canadian content so that you know what you want to support and you want to have an idea of what you want to connect with, what kind of product you want to connect with your audience with. But really the rules as they apply, for example, to broadcasters that Susan described, we're shooting ourselves in the foot because we're putting the traditional broadcasters, if you like, at a disadvantage. Now we ask them to contribute money to a production fund. We ask them on prime time to exhibit a certain number of Canadian shows, which is great for people that make the shows, but not so great for their competitiveness vis-a-vis necessarily, vis-a-vis a Netflix and so on. So it was more pushing the content is what we were doing, which was fine in that era of limited timeshare, if you like. But now we have to be more aware that it has to be more demand-driven. People have to somehow demand their Canadian content, and that's the challenge.
How do Alan, I'll go to you on this. How do Daniel says they have to demand their Canadian content, but they're competing against cultural industries in the South, which can by 1,000-fold out-promote and all of that kind of stuff, the content they've got.
Let me just say that Canadian radio is still powerful, profitable, and popular. I mean, 88% of the people tune into the radio in Canada every week, so it's still a very viable industry. And CanCon, despite all the grumbling in the 70s, because we were putting out some really substandard stuff and we were forced to play this next to the best artists in the world, CanCon for radio for music has been a wild success. I don't think anybody is ever going to say that, well, we don't need CanCon on the radio because A, it's the right thing to do, and B, there's a tremendous appetite for it. We have a vibrant domestic music scene where we have a number of artists that are look at the Tragically Hip, were very successful and very profitable.
Only because of CanCon?
Mainly because of CanCon, because they didn't have that much reach outside of our borders. Then we have artists like Justin Bieber and The Weeknd and Drake and Sarah McLachlan and Shania Twain and Celine Dion. All these artists are Canadian who have managed to come up through our system and then break out worldwide. For a country of our size and our population next to the United States, we have no business being as successful as we are on the music stage. But a lot of that has to do with our infrastructure and our cultural support and our financial support.
But I infer from your comment that without the CanCon regulations requiring broadcasters to play X number of minutes, hours, songs, etc., you don't think these artists could have broken out otherwise?
Well, it's taken decades for this system to come into its own. And I think it would, if broadcasters wanted to cut their CanCon right now, I think that they would hear from the audience because we have developed, as a nation, a strong, strong affection for homegrown artists. So whether it's 30%, 35%, or 40%, nobody's complaining about it anymore.
Because we like them.
We do like them. And if you want something that's not offered, well, then now we have these options, online options, which is where things begin to get sticky.
Well, let's talk about that stickiness here. The FANGs, as they're called, FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. I want to show you a little clip here. This is Richard Stursberg, the former broadcasting executive, who was on this program not too long ago, talking about the infiltration into Canada of the FANGs. Sheldon, if you would.
They are vampires in the culture in the sense that they come, they set up in Canada. They do not pay taxes in Canada, despite the fact all the Canadian media companies obviously pay taxes. They have drained, between Facebook and Amazon, they have drained 50% of the media advertising market out of Canada and redirected the money now to Silicon Valley.
But clearly they are providing something people desperately want, which is why they're so successful.
No doubt about that. And that's fine, but they should not be allowed to operate enjoying significant advantages that no Canadian company has. All the Canadian companies pay tax, they respect the foreign ownership rules, they make contributions to Canadian culture. The FANGs do none of these things. So they're kind of free riders within the economy.
Richard Sturzberg, the former broadcasting executive. Catherine Tate, the president and CEO of the CBC, called Netflix in Canada cultural imperialism. What are you hearing out there in the media ecosphere about what needs to be done to fix this issue about the digital giants, in his words, free riding in our system?
Well, this is a chorus that echoes across the industry. Broadcasters, cable companies have been up in arms about the fact that the playing field is no longer level, in their words, that they have all these obligations. Tech giants are able to compete with them. They have deep pockets. They're already spending billions of dollars on content where Canadian broadcasters don't have those kinds of budgets. So they're competing already with unlevel resources. And they're talking about having also requirements that aren't level. And so you saw Pierre-Carl Péladeau in front of the CRTC just last week saying the system is broken and it needs to be completely rebuilt. He has his own agenda, of course, but that is something that many people within the industry agree on, that we cannot continue, whatever you think of CanCon, we can't continue to compete in an environment where one set of players has very significant obligations and another set of players does not.
What does the CD Howe have to say about this?
Well, I agree with that last statement. You know, the level of playing, the playing field is not level. One thing that we just to take that off the table, if that's even possible, but on taxes, obviously, we are for a level playing field. We do think people should that consume Netflix and iTunes now charges Canadian taxes. We do think that that should occur. Ideally, difficult politically, because people like their Netflix, and to me that is the challenge.
You know what a Netflix tax would be, right? I mean, Sturzberg says it's about $1.50 a month.
Yeah.
To make an even playing field.
And we've published a paper saying that would be a good idea, but politically it's a bit of a football because people do like the content, and some of it I would say is quite good. So it goes back to the mind share. And what do we do to fulfill the purpose of public policy, which is, in fact, a good economic public policy purpose, which is to provide and connect Canadian audiences with Canadian content. And that is the challenge. It's the connection. We need to subsidize the production, but it's the connection part that is now becoming a bit wobbly.
And the waters have been muddied here by political talking points. So when you hear the phrase Netflix tax, what we're really talking about there is requiring Netflix to remit the sales tax on its subscriptions, which is a totally different issue than asking them to pay into the system and either support Canadian content financially or make it what's called more discoverable on their platform, essentially promote it on their platform. This has all come under the umbrella of Netflix tax, and it's been a way of making people afraid of paying more money for this system. But they're two fundamentally separate issues.
And the same thing with music. I mean, radio is fighting against streaming music services. Spotify doesn't pay HST on any purchases in Canada. Neither does Apple Music. Neither does Tidal. Neither does Rhapsody and Napster. They're all tax-free. And again, it's $1.50. It just seems weird. And you know, Canadian broadcasters, radio people. I mean, I used to write checks when I was programming for hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that these people do not have to pay. And it's very difficult because, again, I said radio was popular, powerful, and profitable. However, we're a legacy industry, and like many other legacy industries, we're trying to adapt to new digital realities. But it's the equivalent of trying to change the wings when you're cruising at 38,000 feet. So it's very difficult.
Yeah.
So what do we need to do?
Well, that's a multi-billion-dollar question. What we need to do is adapt to the new technology in ways that co-opt it or somehow integrate it with what we're doing, while at the same time making sure that everybody that is playing in our space and the traditional cultural gatekeepers are no longer penalized for being traditional cultural gatekeepers.
And I mean, to me, that leads us to a model where I think we could all actually agree on the tax question. Number one, it's politically difficult. That's the challenge, as with other taxes.
Say, why is it politically difficult when you could come at this from a nationalistic point of view? If I could stand up in Parliament and say, look, these foreign countries are siphoning away Canadian dollars into Silicon Valley or whatever.
And they don't pay tax.
And they don't pay tax. I mean, how do you argue against that?
You could run on it.
Well, it has been done.
Don't tempt me.
It has been done, yes. Yeah. And I think that, so on the tax question, I think we all agree it's a tough nut to crack, but it should be done. And that would generate some revenues that the government could potentially redirect to subsidize production. And to me, that's a challenge. And so, it's the production aspect, the industry aspect. We need that. But that is only one part of the challenge. And the bigger challenge remains what kind of rules you're going to have in place, if any. I would argue potentially none. Incentives but not rules or obligations to connect that Canadian content with the Canadian public or an international public, which is the real purpose of cultural policy. Otherwise, why have any?
Well, let me suggest that what we've been talking about here is only half the problem. The issue of a level playing field between the FANGs and our domestic content carriers. The other part of the problem is our relationship with the United States. The current Prime Minister's dad said this in 1967 about relations with the States. Living next to you is in some ways like sleeping with an elephant. No matter how friendly and even-tempered is the beast, if I can call it that, one is affected by every twitch and grunt. So, how do we maintain good relations with the United States, who will scream bloody murder if we were to try to put a tax on some of these streaming services, et cetera? Is that a problem?
Well, it was a problem with the USMCA, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They
A
did
little
bring it
bit.
up, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. So what do we do about that? Because they're going to scream bloody murder if we try to do that.
Well, this particular administration will. I think we have to stand up for ourselves and come up with something that doesn't allow us to be completely snowballed by the rest of the world.
I mean, 35 years ago, when the North America, first when the free trade agreement was being negotiated, and then NAFTA after that, the notion that our cultural industries ought to have some kind of distinctive treatment and that the government of Canada ought to be allowed to continue to subsidize them, that was extremely contentious in those negotiations in the late 1980s, and it's no less contentious today, I would suggest. Do we just go beat that, do we beat that drum anyway?
Yeah, so the USMCA does continue the cultural exemption that we had in the NAFTA. A good question as to whether it's as strong as in the bilateral deal. That's still under discussion. I think subsidizing cultural production, which the U.S. does, by the way, in different ways also, that is not an issue. Taxing fairly a foreign corporation, that is to say, in exactly the same way that you tax a domestic corporation, that is also not an issue. What might be an issue is if you say our producers, our Canadian-owned producers, have to contribute to a production fund, for example, media fund, and your corporation also has to. That might be perceived as an unfair subsidy, if you like, on Canadian culture. But on the taxation and on the subsidization side, and on Canadian content potentially being treated differently than U.S. content, from those perspectives, there is wide berth. So that would be my contention. The U.S. does not have a lot of room to maneuver there using trade agreements as much as people think. They're big, but they do the same thing in a lot of cases. So,
What would happen, Alan, if we just got rid of Canadian content regulations today?
Well, we have a number of organizations across the country that owe their existence to Canadian content organizations, so they would scream bloody murder because they would be phased out of existence and lose everybody would lose those jobs. I think, like I said earlier, you would see an outcry from Canadians who are upset that they no longer have an opportunity to hear Canadian material on a regular basis. And I think you would have a real problem within the live and recording music industries because
they would have no reason to exist in the current state.
But the inference I draw from your answer there is that if we didn't oblige broadcasters to play Canadian content, they wouldn't. And is that true?
Well, that would have been the case many years ago. I don't think it's the case now.
So then why do we need the regs?
I think you need some sort of safety net, maybe, I don't know what the proper level, the proper quota is. I mean, that is a debate that's been going on for a very long time. Is it 15%, 25%, 30%, 35%, 50%? That's another discussion. But I think Canadian broadcasters would do it anyway. As to how much they would do would probably erode over time, which is my concern. And it wouldn't necessarily be everybody all at once. It would be a couple of outliers who would push it, and then they would have an American-style sounding radio station which would exclude all Canadian stuff, and that's a bad idea.
Susan, in your conversations on this issue, do you hear from the corporate sector that they'd love to get out from under the obligations of playing more Canadian content?
I think absolutely they'd love to get out from under the obligations of having to spend money on it. I think particularly the private broadcasters for many years have essentially made Canadian content under duress. That said, many of them would disagree with me and say, no, we love Canadian content, we love making it. But there was a very lucrative model for many, many years where the TV broadcasters went down to Hollywood, essentially bought the rights to the American shows, the really buzzed about American shows, and had the exclusive right to broadcast it here. And that is what their business was based on. Everything, including subscriber fees, advertising revenue, all of the things that flowed back into the Canadian system. That, again, it's declining. Household subscriptions, television subscriptions have been declining now for many, many years. People are cutting the cord.
Cord cutting, yep.
Or they're cord nevers. They're a young generation who has just never felt the need to have a television subscription. So what we do know for sure is that the economic model is fundamentally changing. The Netflixes of the world would argue, you don't need Canadian content regulations. Look at all the wonderful Canadian content that we're promoting. So for example, Baroness von Sketch, the wonderful CBC comedy, has found a wider audience through secondary distribution on Netflix.
Oh, let's not even talk about the Trailer Park Boys.
There you go. And then
there you go.
Netflix would also tout their co-productions of things like Alias Grace. Now, some people who are suspicious might say they're doing that particularly actively because right now they're in an environment where they're trying to stave off regulation. They would say, no, it's because we genuinely want to make these stories. So we're in a real moment right now where the fundamental economic model is changing. You have these new players coming in, and we have to decide what the system is going to look like. And that's actually being talked about right now. The Broadcasting Act, the law that governs this entire industry, including the mandate of the CBC, the mandate of the CRTC, that is all under the auspices of the Broadcasting Act, and that's been opened up for review. So a panel is examining how the Broadcasting Act could or should change right now. They're going to produce a report next month, and then it'll be up to the government to decide, do we need to fundamentally upend how these regulations have worked for decades?
And then we have an election.
I was going to say, that presents an interesting problem and opportunity for any party going into the next election, which is only 6 months away. You know, if something comes back that's extremely culturally nationalistic, that's something you may want to run on.
They're going to punt the football on that, though. It's not going to be an election issue. I don't think that they want to muddy those waters with talk about Canadian content in an election cycle. I think that if anything, any action that was taken as a result of that report would happen after the next election, for sure.
You talked to the federal finance minister, yeah, Bill Morneau?
I did. It was a number of years ago. He was on a listening tour across the country asking people within the industry what we thought of going forward. And nothing was really determined during these meetings. They were simply opportunities to discuss what was going on in each of our particular areas of expertise. And don't really know what came of all that. A couple of people, from the TV side especially, did mention a Netflix tax, and I mentioned it, and there was this kind of stiffness around the table, and then the party broke up.
The party broke up.
If you call it that, then it will, yes.
Can I ask you about Quebec? Quebec, and I want to talk about film now. Quebec clearly has a more what's the word I'm looking for? A more developed, a more vibrant, a more popular film scene than English Canada does. And, I'm not going to embarrass anybody here, but I'm tempted to say, if you went to the Canadian Screen Awards, the equivalent of the Academy Awards, and I bet you if you walked down Yonge Street right now and you asked anybody, what was the best picture of the year this year?
No clue.
Nobody would know it. It's a film from Quebec. I think all the nominated movies this year for Best Film were out of Quebec. They have a much more developed film industry there. What do we do about that?
Well, Alan mentioned, the same nirvana, cultural policy nirvana that I envisage, which is you have to connect with your audience.
But they can do that in Quebec.
Clearly, they can do that. They do that. And the question is, why is this not happening? I guess your observation to the same degree in English Canada, and clearly it's a linguistic question.
Yeah, it's language.
But it's also, a lot of the cultural support that we give out is literally to create an industry, but the industry can create American movies or American stars or American singers that are completely undistinguishable from the Canadian ones. And to me, that's a bit of our challenge. So when I hear Alan saying, Canadian audience supports our Canadian singers, support is not the right word, they love them. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's what we want. And I think there's actually this a parallel there with our innovation policy. For years, we were pushing R&D tax credits. R&D, as long as you do R&D, everything's going to be fine. And then somebody realized we don't commercialize the thing. We don't connect with the public. And now the subsidies are for establishing that connection with the clusters and things like that. And I think if we had a similar system for cultural policy, provide subsidies for clusters that say, I'm going to take good Canadian content and connect it with the public. To me, that's the next phase of cultural policy.
Okay, but it is, Alan, a bit of an unfair comparison. Quebec, frankly, because it's French, does not have to compete against the American giant to the south and much of those cultural industries. If people want French content, there's only one place they can get it, and that's the province of Quebec.
And they have a very well-developed star system in terms of their music industry. Sometimes there is crossover into English Canada. It does happen several times a year. But yeah, it is a linguistic thing, and it is a well-established cultural thing in terms of the star system that they've built with music. We don't talk about album sales much anymore, but I would look at the SoundScan sales in any given week a number of years ago, and the number one album would be an artist I did not recognize selling 20,000 records in its first week in Quebec.
In Quebec.
And of those 20,000 records, 19,500 of them were in Quebec.
That was me buying.
You were getting them all.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just occurred to me, I probably should answer the question. The best picture in Canada this past year was a movie called Une Colonie, a coming-of-age story about a 12-year-old girl in Quebec. And I'm going to guess that 99.9% of the people watching this right now haven't seen it, don't know about it. Maybe they should look into it.
So here's a question along those lines. Why isn't there something on my cable TV guide that is all Canadian? Why isn't there an all Canadian channel?
What's the answer?
I don't know.
Aren't there?
If there is, I don't see it on my system.
Well, is the CBC not an
CBC.
all-Canadian
Well,
channel?
outside the
Yeah,
CBC, but
yeah.
we have all these movie channels, and there is no TVO. But no, I'm talking about specialty movie channels. Why is there not?
You want an all-Canadian
Yes.
specialty movie channel?
Yes.
And would you oblige people to have to carry it in one of their bundles?
You can put it as like with the must-carry tier. We do that with APTN.
Yeah.
We do that with the Weather Network. We do that with CBC News World. So why not?
I want to get into this. Not too long ago, at Nathan Phillips Square in downtown Toronto, there were about 50 women in red dresses gallivanting in the square, and no one could figure out what was going on until somebody realized, oh, they're shooting The Handmaid's Tale. Mm-hmm. The Handmaid's Tale was written by a Canadian. It has some Canadian actors in it.
Shot in Canada.
It's shot in Canada. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's considered Canadian content.
Well, this goes to the very point we made at the beginning of this conversation. We have to decide what Canadian content is. Mm-hmm. And Canadian content definitely has a branding problem. That's evident in the fact that just recently, the Canada Media Fund, one of the funds that gives money to produce this content, they launched an advertising campaign called Made to promote Canadian content. But in there was a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, they were touting actors, famous Hollywood actors that have come out of Canada. They were touting Deadpool, which was shot in Vancouver and stars Ryan Reynolds, but is not something that I think would be considered technically Canadian content. And so are we talking about supporting jobs and a film industry here, a television industry here, writers, directors, actors? Or are we talking about Canadian stories? And if so, how do we define what constitutes a Canadian story? That's a big, big question that I don't know that we've ever effectively grappled with.
And I think Handmaid's Tale now is considered, is it now considered CanCon? I think it is now. Initially it was not. But you can see how sort of...
Well, then we have a series like Star Trek Discovery, which is filmed here in Toronto, at down by the lake.
and is fabulous, I have
That's
to say.
very good.
Absolutely fabulous.
But is that Canadian content?
Well,
It's
Canadians in
Canadian
space.
industry.
Yeah, that's right.
From
Providing
a cultural
jobs here.
policy perspective, different.
So many things to discuss and so many things to figure out, and I'm making all of you responsible for figuring this out by the time the year is over. Alan Cross from the Ongoing History of New Music, Susan Krasinski-Robertson from the Globe and Mail's Report on Business, Daniel Schwanen, the VP of Research at the C.D. Howe Institute. Good to have all of you on TVO tonight. Thanks so much. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.